Back in the olden days, when I was a little girl, there was no television. At least it certainly wasn't available for the home user. But my parents liked to go to the movies a lot, and so part of the movie program was always included a newsreel. And that was the visual update of what was going on in the world that I was exposed to in those days when I was just a small child. I'll never forget the newsreel I saw at the end of World War II. It had to do with the American soldiers going into the areas of Germany and other places where the Holocaust had taken place, where the concentration camps were. The pictures, the vivid pictures of the soldiers going into Auschwitz and other of those places, and pictures that I still see in my head of the Jewish survivors who were hardly more than skeletons with skin on their bodies, skin on their bones. The horrible pictures of piles of corpses that had been gassed and then burned. As a child, I was shocked and horrified to see those pictures. I think the most horrifying thing of all for me was to get the message that it was other human beings that had done that to their fellow man. I couldn't comprehend it. How could they do this? It was beyond my understanding, and it was just the most shocking and horrifying thing. That, I believe, was my first awareness, my first conscious awareness of the horrifying things that human beings can do to other human beings in that energy of prejudice and bigotry. That was my first exposure to it. What I'm going to be talking about today is discovering and healing hidden prejudice. The name of this show is Living Wisdom. And when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and growing up in the San Fernando Valley in California, living in Burbank as a matter of fact, my parents subscribed to the daily newspaper. I think it was called the Daily News. And I read a lot when I was a kid, and I read the newspaper every day. One of the series of articles that the newspaper, the Daily News, began to run was on the Jim Crow laws in the South. Just as my earlier exposure to prejudice, bigotry, and the horror that can come from that when one part of the population abuses, punishes another part of the population for being different. The Holocaust was my reference when this show began. Now, as I was reading every day these articles on the Jim Crow laws in the South, I had never before encountered the fact that in the wonderful country of United States, in this America that I was growing up in, that there could actually be this same kind of prejudice and bigotry. I was shocked. I really was shocked to find out that there were parts of the country, like the South, where a whole mass of the population, the black, or colored as it was called back in those days, colored population should be so discriminated against that they were forced to go to different schools. They were forced to use different drinking fountains, different restrooms in public places, sit in the back of the bus, all of these things that were being written about in this series of articles that I was reading on the Jim Crow laws in the South. So I would say that within myself, I became consciously aware of discrimination in that way, and that awareness brought up the sorrow within me, the compassion, the empathy within me. Just like we all have these emotions, but so often they're not triggered until something significant happens. And these were the significant things that came to me that triggered my own compassion in that way. As time went by, as I grew and changed, and I was growing up in what was then a lily-white bedroom community of Los Angeles called Burbank. I think throughout my entire school history, grammar school, junior high, and high school, there were only maybe 2 black kids I ever encountered in any of my classes. There were a really small group of Jewish kids who were part of the class that I was in that went through all of those levels of schooling. So it wasn't like some of the neighborhoods in the East where in one part of the neighborhood there's the Irish contingent and the other part is the Puerto Rican, and that kind of separation where prejudice and discrimination and bigotry and focusing on differences that came up every day. That wasn't how it was for me. It was sort of a rare thing for me in my early life. Of course, my life went on. I got married, had children, was so involved in the day-to-day living of my life that I really didn't give these issues of prejudice too much thought, except for when they came up for me in the newspaper or later on television. Back in 1985, because of the circumstances of my life, I had to sit down and take a deep, hard look at myself, at my life as it had been, the same old patterns that were being repeated year after year, decade after decade. And I decided to make some changes with myself. I decided to become a different kind of person than I had been. To become, in a sense, more than I had been. I also decided to embark on my spiritual path, just to explore that, to see where it would lead me. Traditional religion had never resonated with me. Organized religion had never resonated with me in the past. And so I sort of ignored that spiritual side of myself until this time in '85 when I decided to make some changes, and one of them would be to learn more about my spiritual self. When I made those choices, those new choices and decisions, why, rather magically, new information, books, teachers started to come my way. What I learned from the really beginning in about 1986, was that I created my own reality. The first time I heard that it was like a bell that rang, a bell of truth that rang for me. And over the next years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and continuing now, of course, I've learned at deeper and deeper levels how I truly do create my own reality, just like how everybody else creates their own reality. The physical world is an illusion. It is a holographic illusion made up of energies that are constantly flowing. When we focus our attention on them, they stand still in the form of electrons and subatomic particles. There. See, I'm so passionate, I'm getting carried away. The field of quantum physics has supported this, and with newer and newer discoveries in the field of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, reinforces this belief, this knowing that the world is an illusion and that each person creates their own reality. They create it either by causing it or by allowing it. The causing it part, that's the easiest for us to understand and the easiest for us to own, to take responsibility for it. We cause it by the choices and decisions we make, the actions we take, the things we say and do, the way we are overtly in the world. We cause it. The more subtle part of how we manifest our own reality, how we create our own reality, is that we allow it. And this is the part that most people, including myself, find more difficulty taking responsibility for. We allow our reality in our personal life and on the world stage by the beliefs and attitudes that we hold, by the thoughts and feelings that we hold, that we don't express, that we don't process and release and change. And we also have, for our creation, tools available: imagination, desire, and expectancy. Now, getting back to the core issue of this topic, which is discovering and ending prejudice, it's about discovering and ending the prejudice that resides within ourselves. Because of my earlier experiences as a child and my early awareness of the suffering and pain that prejudice and discrimination and bigotry can cause, I felt that I was a compassionate person, that I surely didn't have prejudicial thoughts or beliefs resonating within me. I thought I couldn't have that. I wouldn't feel such sorrow when I turned on TV and saw the horrible things that were happening in the world. Well, fortunately, I was willing to open up to the possibility of that. And what I have learned more and more is that in my unconscious mind, just as each of you have an unconscious mind, are these same beliefs and attitudes, thoughts and feelings and things that are from past lifetimes, experiences from past lifetimes. And so I have learned to open up and get in touch with those that are having influence in my reality today. I have learned that when I turn on the television or when I read a newspaper, when I have a conversation with somebody and I am once again confronted with evidence of prejudice and bigotry that is still happening in the world, after I deal with my own horror, my remorse and sorrow and my anger and blame and my self-righteous anger at those that are causing it, when I'm willing to be by myself and take responsibility and say, okay, Patty, what part of me could possibly be creating this? What I've learned is there are these undiscovered parts of myself from past lifetimes who still are holding the resonance of these beliefs. So I have learned how to work in meditation, which is a form of self-hypnosis, how to bring them forward, how to bring these parts of me, these, shall we say, past lifetimes, which I can imagine to be as in personified form, imagine them to be a human being, so to speak, in meditation, and to let them speak to me, let them express their feelings. Sometimes I get in touch with the part of me, the parts of me that have been the persecutors. This is really difficult for anyone who is a loving person, for anyone who is a compassionate person, for anyone who considers themselves actively involved in their spiritual path. It's more difficult to own the fact that, yes, indeed, I and we have these parts that were the abusers, that were the persecutors and the prosecutors. But I've learned how to do that, and when I do, when I forgive myself for having been that, for having held that in my vibration, when I forgive myself for creating that, for allowing it in my reality, something within me shifts and changes. And then I'm able to feel compassion and love for myself, despite the fact that I may have been something I would not want to be now, may have done things that I wouldn't consciously do now. So I forgive myself, and that helps to bring about a change. And it has a ripple effect in my world. And it also allows me to have more compassion, more understanding, more love even, for those I see who are the perpetrators. Doesn't mean I condone that. Doesn't mean it makes it okay for anybody to do anything to anybody else. No, it just gives me a level of compassion. And because I have the knowledge that any person has the ability to grow and change whenever they want, I understand that those other beings who co-create my reality with me, they will have as many opportunities to grow and change as they choose, whether it's in this current lifetime or in the multitude of lifetimes that they may want to experience. To demonstrate how in my personal life I got feedback some years ago that I hadn't healed enough of my own prejudice. I had a relationship with a very nice man. I'll call him Joe. He and I had been friends in the past, had had a relationship in the past, and we had gotten together because there was a basic caring for each other. I had already been on this new spiritual path of mine that began back in 1985. I'd already been on it for a number of years. So I had quite a bit of self-awareness. I did understand that I created my own reality, even in my personal life and on the world stage. So when Joe and I resumed our relationship, so to speak, I was absolutely shocked the first time I heard him. He was watching television. He absolutely went ballistic over a story on television about, I think it was about welfare mothers who were a particular ethnic persuasion. And he was screaming these horrible, prejudicial things. This nice guy just turned into this completely different person it seemed, and I was stunned. I was shocked. My first reaction was to turn and think, I'd like to say to him, what are you saying? Don't you know how hurtful this is? But I had enough presence of mind, enough awareness to understand that somehow I was allowing this to happen. I would never say out loud the things he was saying. I would never admit to myself that I had this kind of prejudice still within me. But there was some part of me that was allowing this person who was just right there to allow it. In a sense, he was expressing these things that I had not owned within myself. When I was later by myself at home, and I sat down and I was willing to open up to the deeper parts of me that could possibly be still holding these suppressed feelings, these limiting beliefs, these hurtful attitudes towards other people. I was able to, what I call recognize that they still existed, acknowledge that yes, indeed, this was part of who I was. I hadn't healed it yet. I forgave myself for still holding these things, for not processing this stuff sooner. And I did several meditations. One of the wonderful things that's part of my spiritual path is that I have gained, shall we say, a large toolbox full of tools and techniques, metaphysical tools and techniques that I can use to heal what needs to be healed within me. I wrote a book some years ago called A New Spirituality Beyond Religion. And in my book, I give the details of how each of us creates our own reality. The details of a lot of the things that I'm talking about today. And I talk about some of the tools and techniques that have been available to me that have helped me bring about healing and change, that have helped me become more of the spiritual being that I was meant to be and that I am on some other levels. My book is available in bookstores and other places. So fortunately, when I was confronted with this shocking expression of prejudice and bigotry, I was eventually able to go by myself, own that it was a part of me that I was allowing to happen, and to heal it and shift it and change it. It wasn't too much longer after that than my friend Joe and I went our separate ways. But he certainly had performed a service in a way to me, because he was a mirror. He was a reflection back to me of this part that I was unwilling to believe, that I was unaware of. So for that I'm grateful. And I find throughout my entire life, those closest to me, those people closest to me, are indeed mirrors back to me of what I need to change within myself. Yes, when I watch television and I see the horrible things that are happening in the world, my first reaction is to feel the rage, the outrage, the anger, the sorrow, the devastation, emotional devastation. But as soon as I'm willing to take my power back, as soon as I'm willing to own the higher truth that there's still a part of me that is allowing this in my reality, then I do my processing, I do my forgiveness. I replace those feelings that I had been holding with the compassion and love, letting myself feel compassion and love for myself. Actually healing those parts of me that are creating these things in the world. And a magical thing happens. There is a synergy that takes place from that process of recognizing, acknowledging, forgiving, and changing. The synergy is that I change. The synergy produces changes in my personal life and even in the world at large. The changes are fewer and fewer of those situations about which to feel outrage. To replace the outrage with compassion. And I know that one thing that has been lacking for hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands of years in our world is compassion. The more compassion I feel for myself and the world, the more change is happening. All of these things that I'm sharing with you that are personal to me, I offer to you as inspiration, perhaps a different way of looking at your own life. And I thank you for your attention today. You've been watching Living Wisdom, and this is Patty Paul saying goodbye until the next time.